Welcome to Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hail Varsity and at Schmidt_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmidt.
Welcome to it. Great to be with you on a Thursday. It's Hail Varsity Radio. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel, and you. Ways to get in touch and involved with us. There are aplenty. Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. Also, the phone lines can dial up at 466-3776, 466-3776, 800-825-5865. Also, email chris@hailvarsity.com. And go ahead and watch the show if you like. You can do so with ESPN Lincoln, Facebook, and Twitter. The Hail Varsity Radio Twitter handle at HVarsity Radio. That's where you catch Coffee and Cream with Damon and Andrew weekday mornings. And yes, YouTube, the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. All that accessible for you. Find us on Twitter at Schmidt_radio, at Herbal Essence for Elijah Herbel. That's where you can get in touch with us. Okay, 20 minutes from now, Brandon Vogel will check in. I don't know that it's going to be a cabin in the woods new year, but same pretty cool classic football-looking office. So I expect to see Vogues with that vaunted bookshelf behind him talking some Big Red Ball with us in about 20 minutes in hour two. Gary Barnett, Hall of Fame coach, will kick off the second hour. And Mitch Sherman from The Athletic next hour. Danny Burke with Veasan Sports Network lays out the play-in for the playoff. A lot of teams, 8 in fact, vying for a few final spots. Elijah, great news. You heard it possibly with the Sports Center update, but Davon Hamlin is doing remarkably better. That's been a story that the nation's been following and watching all week long since Monday night, and you just smile and pause. For some of us and many of us, the power of prayer first, but secondly, just the work that the medical experts have been able to do and continue to do, where Davon's able to at least write to his family members, hold hands with family members, and this has been remarkable to be able to follow and provide some good news with.
Yeah, and you sit back and you go, you're almost thankful it happened where it did. And not that it happened, but when it happened, you're almost thankful it happened on a football field, because within 30 seconds of going down, he's being treated by
experts,
some of the best medical professionals you can have in that situation. And then they have an ambulance on site. They can get him to start going to the hospital fashion. Say if this happened in your home, it's going to take the ambulance time to get there, time to figure out what's happening, time to get him in the ambulance. I mean, they were able to do that very quickly, get him to a level 1 trauma center, which the fact that that's 2 miles from the stadium, one of the best trauma centers in the country, is phenomenal. And some of the best doctors in the country, definitely some of the best doctors in the area, doing work on Damar Hamlin and just providing us some good news today, not only for him, but really for everyone that was watching. That was a scary moment. To see him down on the field and all those players crying and praying and just terrifying scenes. The fact that it's ended with, or I shouldn't say ended, but the fact that we're seeing some good news a couple days removed is just phenomenal news, because you're sitting there at home looking at that screen thinking the worst. And I guarantee everyone who's on that broadcast was thinking the same as well. And the fact that we're getting some good news only a couple days later is just incredible news, and it's a credit to the doctors and nurses that were working on Damar Hamlin through the past couple days.
Coach McDermott's supposed to weigh in with Buffalo. We may bring you some of his comments before we are done. Some thoughtful takes from Zach Taylor yesterday at Cincinnati's midweek press conference, and so many Nebraska fans proud of Zach Taylor for what he's done in the headset. They've always been proud of how he's carried himself and conducted himself as a leader and coach, and watching him climb up the ranks. And then to see Zach be a part of this it makes Nebraska fans very, very proud. And the main news here, the main story is with Hamlin and his recovery. Clearly, still things to be cautious and worried about, but it's looking really, really good compared to what the onset and outlook was like. Tomorrow, Nebraska coordinators will speak. We'll be there for that, have reaction to it, but you have offensive coordinator Saffield and of course, Coach White both will be front and center at Memorial Stadium tomorrow. Excited about that. As we fast forward to some Nebraska football, we'll get into some portal visitors momentarily, but talked with Evan Bland yesterday. His story out today on Josh Fleeks, the transfer from Baylor. And Fleeks, a guy that was a wideout, was a running back, and has been through a lot with his college football career when it comes to different position coaches, schemes, dealing with injuries. But this is another example of relationship, not just building, but impression, right? Think about Matt Rhule that has wowed many nationally and locally, is the fact that he did what he did as quickly as he did on the recruiting trail. He did so in a fascinating form to close like he did with the high school faction, right? He did well in this early signing period. You step back, Elijah, and there are folks that either committed originally to play for Rhule, and it's been all sorts of wacky with guys getting extra years. Guys are coming back to Rhule. Maybe you're an assistant coach. Maybe you're a former assistant. Maybe you've been on staff with Matt Rhule on the coaching side of things. But Fleeks, another example of a guy that wants to play for Rhule. He wants to be a bit of a peer voice for the rest of the Nebraska locker room and set those rules, those expectations. Here's what you're going to get with Coach Rhule. Here's what to expect. And this is how the culture will be built.
And it reminds me very much of a transfer that Scott Frost had his first year at Nebraska, and Trey Neal.
Trey was nice. He was big.
I mean, it seems to me like almost exactly the same situation where Trey Neal was in a situation where, you know what, he probably wasn't going to get that much playtime the next season at UCF. But he's a guy that had been in Scott Frost's system for a couple of years, knew what Scott Frost wanted, and Scott brought in Trey Neal. And look at Trey Neal. He comes and is Nebraska's starting safety, really sets the tone for that secondary, and I think got that secondary jump started faster than some of the other position groups on that team. And I see the same with Fleeks in that, you know what, he may not be an otherworldly talent you're bringing in the transfer portal, but he's going to be valuable in his own right in that he's going to know the culture, he's going to know what Matt Rhule wants, he's going to be a peer leader, almost another coach within the team in saying, guys, this is what Matt Rhule wants. This is how you're going to see the field. This is the work ethic that's required. This is what you guys need to do in the classroom. This is what you guys need to do at home. This is what you guys need to do once you get into the facility. There's all these things that he's going to be a leader in, even if he doesn't get a snap next season, which I don't think is going to be the case. I think if you're
pretty wide open.
That's what I'm saying. It's pretty wide open. If you're that kind of guy, that kind of leader, I think you're going to differentiate yourself in some ways in the practice field, even if your athletic ability isn't that of some of your peers. You're going to find a way onto the football field in some way, shape, or form. And I think that in and of itself is very valuable. There's going to be a guy that can come in and say, you know what, these are rules. I like that. Maybe it's a show title for today, rules. But these are rules, and this is what you got to follow if you want to see the field here. And I know the last staff didn't do it this way, but this is how we're going to do it. And it's different when it comes from a peer as opposed to a coach.
Right. No, absolutely. And that's you can get the same message, but how is the message being delivered and who's telling you the message? A new guy that's coming in. We've made a lot about Deion's initial press conference and footage in that Buff meeting room.
Saying we're not going to have any hats while he's wearing a hat?
Not just that, but I'm telling. I mean, Deion just went short of holding the door open for people to leave. Okay, I mean that's the feel by so many. If you have a guy here like Fleeks come in and say, all right, I know you as a Nebraska player have been through a ton. You may be a Scott Frost guy. Rhule's been very open about saying, well, you're my guy now. I chose to come coach you, paraphrasing a little bit from his press conference. But with the impact of a guy like Fleeks will not be lost, and it will help bring things together for a better 2023. We spent time talking about expectations yesterday. Well, you need a guy like Fleeks, his message and the trust part peer-to-peer, maybe to get some of that buy-in that could be or there could be a little resistance too.
Well, think about the messaging. There's been a lot made on social media over the past couple of days of some of Rhule's rules, and no hats in the team facility, no jewelry in the team facility, stuff like that. And it's completely different whenever you hear that message from a coach, some 45-year-old man who knows nothing about your life coming in saying, hey, you can't wear that hat in the facility, as opposed
that earring is a little too blingy, Elijah. I can't have it.
Exactly. And it sounds completely different when you hear it coming from a 23-year-old guy who's in his 5th year of college football and says, no, there's reason behind these rules. And that when you hear that, no hats, no jewelry, you go, that's kind of crazy. It's 2022. That's kind of the way society is moving. But you think about it in another sense, in that football's a sport, and a lot of sports are this way, but football might be the prime example of a sport where you need to put team before self and put your individuality to the side.
Right? Are you willing to say, sure, okay, I'm going to take my chain off, my earring out, and leave my hat on the hat rack?
To be a part of the team. That's the crucial read in between the lines scene there is the whole team is going to be doing this. It's almost team bonding that, yeah, no, you probably don't want to take a shower and do your hair before you come to the team facility at 5 a.m., but the rest of the team is going through it. And that's the perfect representation for football because you have to put your individual wants and desires aside when you're playing football and say, you know what, I'm a part of a team. I'm a cornerback. I'm going to go lay my body on the line and take on this offensive lineman pulling around the outside. I'm going to take on that block and let one of my teammates come in and clean up the play because I'm going to be doing the dirty work. I'm going to be doing the thing I don't necessarily want to do to put the team ahead of myself and put winning ahead of myself. And it's the same sense with jewelry and with hats. You know what? You want to be an individual. You want to be walking on the team facility and have the ladies go, wow, he's looking fresh today, you know? But you got to put that aside and say, I've got to put the team above myself. We're going to go through this together. It's going to suck. It's minor. Are you willing to put the team ahead of yourself in order to have team success as a whole? It's a perfect representation for football. And I mean, it's similar to what you see in the military, a very military type training there where we're going to crush the individuality, make the team above all else, and you're going to care about that guy to your left and right more than you care about yourself. It's the same situation with football.
Let's talk portal as 3 portal visitors this weekend. You have Walter Rouse, Stanford left tackle. And, you know, whenever I see or think of offensive lines, I know Stanford's been a program that's been down. I know Coach Shaw stepped away this year. But, man, Stanford had it rolling. Every April NFL draft, you would see through the first 3 rounds a handful of Stanford players come out. And they were, for a time, a preeminent offensive line. What does Nebraska need? They need options and some stability at the tackle spot. Walter Rouse, 39-game starter, 1 year of eligibility left, an honorable mention, all Pac-12 guy. Oh, and by the way, he's a biomechanical engineer.
Well, this past year, he was a finalist for the William V. Campbell Trophy. I had to look this up before the show. It's a trophy awarded by
academic
the
Heisman.
National Football Foundation to the American college football player with the best combination of academics, off-the-field service, and on-field performance.
Yep, that's big. We'll see how things shake out for Nebraska and Rouse because, yes, please, I think is the response from Nebraska football fans. You want to see Ben Hart reach his potential. You want to see Teddy Prohaska stay healthy and be a cornerstone on that offensive line. You have guys like Turner Corcoran that have played tackle. You have some options. You have Hunter Anthony that still has a year, but it never hurts to have more options and find your best 5 with some depth as well. And Rouse could be one of those guys. Baylor left guard. This is Micah Mazuka, and he has quite a few number starts under his belt as well. That is a guy that is from the Philadelphia region that ended up in Baylor and now transferring and has a chance to maybe look and be another guard option for Nebraska for Coach Rhule. So I like both of these names and their history coming in.
But I want to note with these 2 guys, and you know I'm an offensive line guy, Schmidt. I look at both these guys. I don't think either of these guys, and I know Rouse is a 4-year starter at Stanford. That in of itself is special. But neither of these guys stepping in to me are instant starters.
You got to win it.
Ben Scott, I think, is a guy down from Arizona State. He's most likely going to be an instant starter at center next season. Neither of these two guys are going to be instant starters. Rouse is a guy that, came in acclaimed as a freshman. He was on the freshman All-American team, according to The Athletic, but he never quite put it all together. He's a guy that's, looking for the right landing spot in order to get himself 1 year. That's all the eligibility he has left. 1 year to find himself a starting role and to go prove to NFL teams, I can make it. Because he's been a guy he's been on preseason all Pac-12 teams, but he's never quite took that final stride.
Versus second team.
Yes, he's never quite made that final stride of being an actual dude on the offensive line. He's been a solid starter where he's been at Stanford. Stanford's been down, so take that into account. But he's been a solid starter, but he's not head and shoulders above what Nebraska has in their offensive line right now. And Mizuka is the same way, and that not head and shoulders above what Nebraska had. He's been a serviceable starter at Baylor. Both these guys, serviceable starters where they've been. Can they find the right coaching? Can they find the right fit? Maybe, but neither of these guys are going to be, they're the dude right away as soon as they step foot on campus.
Again, it comes down to options. It comes down to depth.
And it should be noted those instant starters, they're hard to find in the transfer portal.
Big time, they are. But to get them on campus is key. At least have the option and, realize your potential. Why the why part of this, why do you transfer? Well, if you're leaving Stanford with coaching transition, Rouse wants to win. Mm-hmm. And, Nebraska may be, I don't know if they're in a better spot than Stanford, but not that different. Brandon Vogel's on the way.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you, it's Hail Varsity, presented by Currency. Great to be with you on a Thursday. Chris Schmidt, Elijah Herbel. We welcome in for the first time in 2023, Brandon L. Vogel at Brandon L. Vogel on Twitter is where you find him, managing editor with Hail Varsity Magazine, hailvarsity.com, and his book with John Cook, Dream Like a Champion. If you want to watch Vogues in this interview, a few ways to do it: the Hail Varsity YouTube channel and the Hail Varsity Radio Twitter handle at HVarsity Radio. We always reference Vogue's phenomenal backdrop with the football office. Vogues, good to spend time with you. How are you?
How are you guys doing? Happy New Year.
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Portal, let's go there. Let's start. And we just ended with three of the names Nebraska looking at this weekend with Rouse. You have Mizuka, and then Kemp, the wide receiver. Where are you at as you look at this opportunity? Do you like portal options on the offensive line? Do you expect it to work if you're Nebraska, or pick a college football team? How heavily do you want to rely on that?
On the offensive line, I like them quite a bit. Those are traditionally, well, not traditionally, because the portal's still new enough that I think we're still finding our way with this. But so far, what we've seen from the portal is those experienced offensive linemen are kind of the hottest commodity, I think, when you look at the portal itself. You're going to be able to get quarterbacks. You're going to be able to get wide receivers, running backs, maybe some defensive backs. The offensive linemen who have played and can bring that experience. I mean, the O-line stands out on a football team as maybe the most developmental spot on the team, I think. Like, you just look at it and say, we might expect some players to come in and play as true freshmen at running back or wide receiver. We've even seen it at quarterback more and more frequently. It's still tough to do on the offensive line. So if you can find some people with some experience there, the competition is always going to be pretty stiff for those guys. But, Nebraska landed one already from Arizona State that I expect to help at center. Mizuka is a guy who was an Under Armour All-American, still pretty early in his Baylor career, relatively speaking. Rouse from Stanford. Now, Stanford hasn't been what it was at the height of the David Shaw era, but personally, I still feel pretty good about the level of training and O-line is getting there. That's still a program I associate with excellent O-line play. 39 games he's played there. And then you move to Billy Kemp, who's intriguing. Sort of a slot guy. I think he's listed at 5'9", do a little bit of everything. I think early in his career he was listed as a running back technically, but led the team in receptions, I think 3 seasons ago, was really close last year, and then this year dealt with some injury and missed a couple of games. But anytime you can add that sort of experience, I think it gives you a little bit of a leg up, particularly for a new coach at a new spot.
Brandon Vogel's with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. And Brandon, there's been a lot made this offseason. I've seen it a couple times now. Well, there's as many defensive backs as Nebraska as there are offensive linemen, and that's been a problem for a couple years now, just how thin some of the offensive lines have been in recent years. Now, I want to get your take on Nebraska adding offensive linemen to the transfer portal. Should they be adding just for the sake of getting more numbers because of how physical the Big Ten is? You're going to have injuries along the offensive line, and you need some depth. Or should they be choosing who they want to bring into this offensive line, knowing, what, we need instant starters. We need guys who are going to come in and make a difference immediately?
Yeah, really good question. I think the numbers dictate that you could sort of open up your pool a little bit, because they do need, in my opinion, to add some depth there. But it comes down to, for me, those O linemen, like they become such a prized commodity in the transfer portal if they've played, a good amount of games, that everyone who has a need on the offensive line, even some schools that may not, are going to be in on a guy. I mean, Michigan won the Moore Award as the top offensive line in the country for the second straight year with a transfer as a key part of that. Vanderbilt transfer went to Alabama and basically started all season. So it's an experience, or it's a position where you really can't shortcut experience. So I think as we continue to go on, all of those guys are going to be really, there's going to be a ton of competition for them. Nebraska can even land one of the guys that is expected to be in town this weekend. We know Mazuka already is. That's a big get for me. It gives you some options up there. And when you look at the lack of numbers, that's the biggest thing. It's like you don't have a ton of options if things happen, if guys go down for a variety of reasons. And we saw that play out this year for the Huskers.
Brandon Vogel spending a few minutes with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. Vogues, let's talk defensive side of the ball for Nebraska. And we were off with Garrett Nelson's announcement, and Nebraska's having to revamp a bit. You have some of the NIL deals secured to keep names like Robinson and Reimer, and that's big time for Nebraska, and also some of the secondary options. I want to get your take, though, defensively, with the facelift part of it here. 3-3-5, we'll hear from Coach White tomorrow. But what does Nebraska need most from whatever the defense looks like next year? What is going to be the biggest point of emphasis if you're White, looking at the personnel you're going to have, and then obviously translating it to success on the field?
Yeah, I think a lot of that is still to be kind of maybe penciled out. It'll be interesting to hear from Coach White tomorrow. I think we'll get a little bit more insight on that. But you just look at losing Nelson and Mathis to the NFL draft. It's a little different, the 3-4, with what that edge rusher ends up being versus, theoretically running a 3-3-5, even though Rhule has said they haven't settled on that's going to be their base set. So I think one of those, a kind of classic edge rusher, which again, pretty similar to offensive line, is always going to be a competitive spot if you're looking towards the transfer portal to do that. I think there's room there. You'd feel good about Nebraska in the middle at the second level with the linebackers returning. In the secondary, no shortage of options there, and pretty good options too, I think. So I look at Nebraska kind of, if there's room to add or needs on the defensive side, you're probably looking at that edge rusher. And I think you might take, another defensive lineman if you had one, because that's a spot like the offensive line where you almost can't have too much depth. And if you've got guys you can feel great about rotating in and not missing a beat, that's when things really start to sink.
Well, Nebraska's done well with some edge rusher acquisition here right before signing day. I know a name that's floating out there, guys, is Jean-Baptiste from Ohio State. He's in the portal, 4.5 sacks. You're good enough to go play for Coach Larry at Ohio State.
Well, it's a guy Nebraska had in the boat until he didn't as well.
Sure. I mean, again, we see this kind of coming back around with Rhule and past relationships, but also Nebraska can tap into somebody that maybe they just didn't close on previously.
Yeah, they've absolutely got a chance there, and that would be coming full circle from such a unique story with going into that signing day. Jean-Baptiste was somebody I think most people kind of counted in Nebraska's class. There's a snow day, there's no school, all of that weird stuff, and it's tough to kind of stand out as a singular player at Ohio State. They're just supremely talented. But a guy who played a ton and certainly made an impact. So it'll be interesting to see if Nebraska is able to revive that. Him just being familiar with the program, with Lincoln itself, I think helps. But that would be a pretty big addition in my view if the Huskers were able to add him.
Brandon Vogel is with us here on Hail Varsity Radio. And Brandon, got one more thought on the defense here for you. You mentioned the fact that you think that Nebraska looks pretty good at the second level at those linebacker spots. And I tend to agree with you because I think Luke Reimer is a guy, upon watching some 3-3-5 defenses operate against Big Ten teams over the weekend, that he fits there well. I think Isaac Gifford fits in that role as well. But I look at Nick Henrich. And I think the jury's still out on if Nick Henrich is going to fit into a 3-3-5 defense, simply for the fact that whenever I watched the games this weekend, those linebackers had to be very multiple, just as good stopping the run as they were, flowing side to side and going and covering tight ends, covering slot wide receivers. And I don't think that's been his game here at Nebraska. So do you think that's a fit? And I ask that because we mentioned the fact that Tony White's probably going to have to amend this defense slightly for the Big Ten, and I wonder if they're going to find a role for him, if that's a guy that, you might need an upgrade there just to try to fit what a traditional 3-3-5 defense looks like.
Yeah, I think that's a really fair and astute question, because I would agree with you. That's one where if Nebraska's, throwing out 3 traditional linebackers, Luke Reimer's kind of been a tackling machine. I would start with him at kind of number 1 in that middle spot. He's also displayed the versatility a little bit that maybe he could shift to one of those outside spots, and that opens up a little bit of room for Nick Henrich. But I would agree. I mean, you're going to need, more often than not, you're going to get into your 2 deep at linebacker in the Big Ten. It's just that kind of league. So I think there will be a spot for Nick, looking at it as we used to with kind of a more traditional 3-4. I don't know that you slot that in and say, like, well, he bumps outside, because there are some questions there. He's more of a prototypical, I think, middle linebacker than maybe anybody Nebraska has on the roster at the moment.
I'm excited for Wright and Giff and their athleticism and versatility in this defense under Coach White. Vogues, less than 60 seconds. What's coming up from you and Hail Varsity here before we say goodbye?
Yeah, hard at work on the January issue, which, is about 10 days out from being off to the printer. Have a good story from Brady Oltmans there on sort of Nebraska and recruiting and how it's turned over a little bit of every rock. I'm currently working on something looking at kind of the track connections with this staff in its past and already here at Nebraska. So that'll all be in the January issue. Make sure to go to hailvarsity.com/subscribe if you aren't already. Make sure you get that. We got plenty of basketball. Saturday is kind of an interesting day for both men and women in terms of looking at games that you play the schedule out. Could end up being pretty important for both of them. I think they're games they need to win. So we'll be watching those closely over the weekend.
Vogues will have his nachos in front of him as he watches intently some Husker basketball this weekend. Vogues, you take care. Thanks for jumping on with us, bud.
Thanks a lot, guys.
There he is, Brandon Vogel with us. Quick timeout, back with more after this.
Chime in 402-466-ESPN or email the show, Chris@HailVarsity.com.
Just try me.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
20 minutes away, we'll hear from Gary Barnett, also Mitch Sherman. Big thanks to Brandon Vogel. And a reminder to get your subscription to Hail Varsity Magazine, hailvarsity.com. HurrdatMediaNetwork.com/offer. I have got that handled finally after 4 weeks of training. Offer, / to take advantage.
I've been sitting in here at the studio with a squirt bottle just ready for Schmidt to mess up.
Let's be honest, it's a shock collar, but it's not around my neck. It's kind of more so around the belly button region, and Elijah's just hammering that to make sure I go. HailVarsity.com / Podcast is where you can get caught up with us on your time. Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, and the full show or different segments and interviews available there as well, and the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. You want to watch us, go for it. So on 3 reporting that Kenny Wilhite no longer part of the Nebraska football staff. I'm looking at Huskers.com right now and going through who's listed and who is not. I still see Ron Brown listed on staff, and there's a fine line, and you have backlash by some in the fan base when it comes to former Huskers, and there's always going to be transition. And again, Elijah, that fine line of retention and then bringing in your own guys. And you just got to do what's best for you as the head coach and how you want to build and move on as a program. But as a guy who's covered the program for a long time, I look at Kenny Wilhite, and this goes back to me growing up here, just as a kid that would go to West Stadium with my family. And one of my favorite players ever, old number 19, was Kenny Wilhite, defensive back. And he's not only was a tremendous player, but how about the work that Kenny Wilhite has done in Lincoln for a long time. He originally joined Nebraska's staff in 2014 as a regional recruiting assistant, elevated to assistant director of player personnel, and then associate director of player personnel in 2015. Has done a lot of work, director of high school relations, has had that title the last 7 years. And Kenny did a great job of running the walk-on recruiting and also helping kind of bridge that gap between pro day scouts and some of the potential players. So Kenny Wilhite not retained with staff, and I know there's a lot of former Huskers that probably aren't happy about this, and then there's some Nebraska fans that aren't happy with it either, and that's the tightrope you got to walk.
Well, and it's kind of what we were talking about in the first segment of Matt Rhule's bringing in his way of doing things here at Nebraska. It's I don't want to say it's his way or the highway. That is kind of the as the old saying goes, but he's going to bring in his ways, and we've seen through his first recruiting period is he wants to do recruiting his way. And I'm not saying that Kenny Wilhite was unwilling to do that, but I'm just saying Matt Rhule wants his guys recruiting the type of players that he wants, and he's got guys that he trusts to go out there and evaluate talent, specifically at high schools around Nebraska, specifically for walk-ons, what type of guys he's looking for there. And I'm just sure going to go with the guy he trusts more in that situation than a guy he has just recently begun working with and a guy he's just recently, met and is trying to figure out more about. You're going to go with the guy that you trust more, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think we can look at what Kenny Wilhite did and say he did a bad job at Nebraska. There's been a couple walk-ons that have done a great job coming in and filling roles for Nebraska since Kenny Wilhite has taken over that role as the director of that and the director of high school relations. So it's not a Kenny Wilhite's being like, because he didn't do a good enough job. It's just, there's a new staff, and that's a reality in college football. Is the new staff and the new head coach is going to bring in guys that he trusts to do the roles that he thinks are important. And let's be honest, the walk-on talent in Nebraska is pretty important, not only to what this Husker football team is, but what the tradition of Nebraska is. And Matt Rhule knows that. Matt Rhule understands that. And he wants to bring a walk-on tradition, I am sure, with him to the University of Nebraska. And he's going to just put a guy that he trusts into that role. I don't think there's anything deeper you should read into it.
It's familiarity.
Yeah.
And Rhule has done nothing, if not followed through with familiarity, every stop he's been. What did his Carolina roster have? It had former Rhule guys. Temple, Baylor. He's going to go get guys that know how he wants things done versus spending time and energy trying to hope it fits and a guy can learn without much of a learning curve. And Kenny Wilhite's going to be fine. Kenny Wilhite's going to go land somewhere and be great again. And I wish him well.
He has experience in his background coaching, actually being an on-the-field coach. He now has got I believe it's 6 years of experience here running the walk-on program and being the director of high school relations. So he's got more of a recruiting background now than he did whenever he came to Nebraska. He did well in that role. And you know what? You were a staffer at a major Power 5 football program. Somebody's going to give you a look somewhere. And considering Kenny Wilhite's also previous background playing football at a high level, very high level, he's going to land on his feet somewhere. And I wonder even if with this holdover with how long Kenny Wilhite's been around, if it was a handshake deal with Matt Rhule and Kenny Wilhite saying, hey, I need somebody who has built relationships with these people for my first recruiting class. I'd love it if you could stick around through the early signing period, and then you can go be on your own and find a new role. Spot. I wouldn't be shocked if it was a case like that. And I don't have any inside information, but you got to look at the timing like that and say, why wasn't Kenny Wilhite let go with the other coaches that were let go 3 weeks ago?
No, it's Kenny's going to do the program a solid, and I think you hit something important there. And honestly, we've spent a lot of time on retention with Nebraska, right? And do you have guys in the program that you can develop? You're going to miss on recruits. It's going to happen. You're going to miss on 4 stars. You're going to miss on 3 stars. And then you're going to get some make goods. Think about the Brandon Rileys and the Janoviches of the world, the Sam Foltzes of the world that, oh, that guy was a walk-on. Spencer Long, oh, that guy was a walk-on. That has to get back to happening, not the misses per se, but finding a guy that's a walk-on that's really damn good that, oh, maybe we should have got him a scholarship, or we're really lucky he decided to walk on because he's one of our better players. You have to have that. That's been Nebraska's advantage, Wisconsin's advantage for years, where you find a guy that's an eraser. You make a mistake on a profile or an assessment in the recruiting world. You just burn a scholarship on somebody that never contributes. How do you fix that? Well, you fix that by finding a guy that is a walk-on that gets elevated to more than just snaps. Maybe he turns out to be an All-American like Jared Thomas. Those are crazy examples.
Those are few and far between,
of best case scenarios. But for the most part here, you're going to need to be able to kill it again with your walk-on assessment.
Yeah, you'll occasionally get those guys, but the Luke Reimers of the world, if you look at it now, the guys that walked on, you go, that guy should have never been a walk-on. But then you're also going to have the guys that, you know what, they're going to step in whenever somebody else goes down and smooth out some of your recruiting misses where, you know what, we don't have a good backup tight end because we missed on a guy recruiting. He hit the transfer portal after year 1. Now we don't have anybody there. And, oh, no, our starting tight end's gone down. And I'm looking at you, Nate Borkacher. He came in, and you know what? He filled big shoes this year as a former walk-on. But he came in, he improved as the year went on, and he did admirably considering the space he was thrown into. That's what I look at with the walk-on program. Guys that can fix some of those recruiting misses, and you know what? Worst case scenario, break in case of emergency, you can step in for a game or two and not notice much drop-off before your starter comes back. That's where the walk-on program is so important.
We hit on portal and thoughts with positions of need. You need some more edge help. You're going to need offensive line help. Nebraska's trying to address that this weekend with some of their visitors. Also the tight end room. Not that it's not good, but it's young. Right. Jack Roberts, a name to be looking for out of North Texas. We'll wind down hour 1. It's Hail Varsity Radio.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time this hour, Gary Barnett met Mitch Sherman, Danny Burke next hour. Get buckled up. Seatbelts save lives, prevents injuries. Only if properly worn. Buckle up. A message from the Nebraska Department of Highway Safety Office. We're presented by Currency. For all your equipment financing needs, go Currency. Schmidt and Elijah Herbel. So, Elijah, I got to ask you this, and I've been thinking about it. Told you a little bit about it. We're going to go to food here in a moment, and it ties into tailgating for the national championship. And I think all the folks, the good folks from TCU that are going to find their way to SoFi Field. I think of Georgia and all the times that you see different things thrown on the grill around Big Ten country, around the SEC, and there's some really talented folks that fire up a grill and get their tailgate going. No RVs are allowed.
No tailgating is allowed.
No tailgating. And we're all a little skeptical of Cousin Eddie showing up and messing things up with the old RV, but that's a staple. This is a national title game Monday, and you have an RV ban, a tailgating ban at SoFi. This should disqualify LA from ever again having any national championships. As cool as the stadium is and how cool the setup looks, I think it's a phenomenal facility. You can't shut down tailgating and RVing.
Well, here's the thing. I think the fans of both teams, both Georgia and TCU,
they are expert
anyway.
tailgaters.
Go tailgate anyway and make them stop everybody. Are they going to stop 80,000 fans from tailgating in the parking lot? No. If there's that one group that decides to disobey and they decide to tailgate, yeah, they'll shut that down. But if there's tens and tens and tens, we're talking hundreds of different groups of tailgaters out there in the parking lot, they can't shut everybody down. That's where I'm coming from here, but I agree with you that it's wrong that they don't have tailgating.
Strengthen tailgate numbers.
Well, it's like, you know what? If everyone's going,
come get me.
If everyone's going 90 on the interstate, the cop's not pulling anybody over. If you got a whole group of 15 cars going 90 on the interstate, what's that cop going to do? They're not pulling them over because they go, I can't stop everybody. It's the same with the tailgaters.
It's the reality. If you're the first in that line of 90, some of us have been.
Or last.
then you're going to get popped. Mark chimes in. Who else is supposed to be visiting? And the three that we're hearing is Rouse this weekend on the offensive line, Mazuka, and then Kemp. Mark, those are the three names. Kemp out of Virginia. But I was thinking about the tailgating. Do you know anybody that's got a whiskey marinade recipe? And I ask this because the best steak I've ever had in my life I had over break with my buddy Dickerson. And it was, and I'm a steak connoisseur. I love it. I love cooking it at home, but I love going to different places around Nebraska and having a steak, right? The old Pepsi Challenge. This place I went to last weekend does a whiskey soak.
Is that up in Omaha?
Yes.
Okay, we're not going to name the place. I know which place you're talking about. And they haven't paid for advertising.
No,
so.
Exactly. I'd named the place, but it was awesome. It was awesome. And I was like, how do I do this at home? How do I replicate? There's like the secret recipes of a few spots, be it a wing spot in town here. How do they do it so well where you just love to go back? The whiskey marinade, because it was a unique taste and it was incredible.
Was it a marinade or was it a wet age? That's my question.
No, I think it was. I think it was marinade.
Okay.
Like it was marinated and thrown in the fridge, and then boom.
The marinade I'd expect to be more of like an overnight thing, whereas a wet age you're going to put it in like the cheesecloth or the aging cloth and soak that in whiskey. So there's a difference there. I'll do some research for you.
Please do. I should have asked Vogel about it. He might have one in his back pocket. Coach Barnett's on the way. Hour 2 with Hail Varsity.
Welcome to Hail Varsity Radio, the voice of Husker Nation. Insight, opinion, expertise, with the biggest and best names talking Nebraska across the state. Join the show on Twitter at Hail Varsity and at Schmidt_radio. Call in at 402-466-ESPN or 1-800-825-5865. Here's Chris Schmidt.
Back into it at Hail Varsity Radio, presented by Currency. Some college football thoughts as we gear up for the national title game. Gary Barnett with us, Hall of Fame coach. Coach, happy 2023. How you doing?
Doing well, Chris. I managed to avoid all the travel issues and the cold weather and just sort of hang out down here in Arizona and watch maybe the best bowl season I've ever seen. It really was sensational. I mean, it seemed like from the very first game to the last game, it was just unbelievable. I mean, you finish off, not necessarily with Penn State, Utah, but you finish off with SC and Tulane the way you did. Oh, my gosh, just great football.
It was, and I look at Kansas's comeback for overtime during this bowl season and how'd that happen. I look at Texas Tech's finish. You're right about USC Tulane. Some of us did not get down to Arizona to see you. Even the semis, Coach, with TCU's ability to hang on and Michigan's late charge, and then how about Ohio State getting outscored like they did in the fourth quarter by Georgia? Just high-level ball. When you look at these situations as a coach, do you console your guys if you don't hold a lead, or do you look at it and say, man, what a comeback we had. We can take that with us the rest of our lives. I mean, there's two sides of that coin.
Yeah, you probably do a little bit of both. I mean, when you get to that level, at that, in a playoff game like that, and you play your hearts out. It's not going to be a perfect game. That there's going to be breaks that are going to be go your way and breaks are going to go the other way. And that's why the game is as great as it is because you just never know. And you get to that level. And I think those are two of the best playoff games we've seen in a long time. But my gosh, if you can't get excited about college football watching those two games, then you need to check your pulse. But they were great. I mean, Ohio State, I felt for that kicker, and Ryan Day, and but you also, Georgia stops them right where they had to stop them, and Georgia's defense finally came to play in the fourth quarter. But man, it took them a while to get caught up, and it just you're playing with young people, and both sides are well coached, and both of them are trained, and both of them know what's going on, and then you got to go play it. And a lot of it depends on breaks, and you realize how fragile that is when you're coaching all the time. Anybody can do anything, anytime, and you train your kids that way. And you talk about that all the time. It's not all their fault. Some of it's the other guys was playing better than you were that time or that play. So that's the way it goes.
Gary Barnett with us, Hail Varsity Radio. Coach, as we look at needing 40 to 45 points in these bowl games to win it, what do you say to your defensive coordinators out there?
Just do the best you can, dudes. Understand that any stop's a good stop. And so forcing a field goal becomes really important. And, we didn't have a great year of scoring, I didn't think, throughout the year. I had to see the stats, but I thought we had, at least at the NFL level, we had a lot more defense being played than offense. And colleges maybe not so much, but you get to those two games and you got high-powered offenses operating. And, your defense may be good, but the other side of the ball might be even better. So this is what you get. But every stop becomes critical. And that's why you fight for every yard, you fight for every measurement. And, that's the drama of the whole doggone thing.
Coach, want to get your thoughts on Max Duggan. Had a chance to see him in high school just across the river in Council Bluffs from Omaha. And he has persevered. He's a coach's kid. There's so much pride in him, not only in the Bluffs region, but also in Omaha. What is his task Monday night against this Georgia defense? What is the recipe TCU and Coach Sonny need to follow?
They don't need to change much. They just need to do what they've done all year. It's in their DNA now to get as far behind as they'll let you, and they can come back. And they know that, and they played that. When you do that 7 times during the year, it becomes who you are. And so that's a great confidence factor. That you don't get to the third quarter and you're losing and you can't find your way out of it. This team goes right down to the last play of the game, and they know it. And that's really valuable that your kids understand, that your players understand that this will go or can go to the last play of the game. You must fight 70 plays, both sides of the ball. And Georgia had a surprise. Georgia had to come back. They've only come back one other time during the year, and that was against Missouri. And they got a little taste of that. So you could find 2 teams in this championship game that both are going to play right down to the last play of the game.
You think it's going to be a close ball game, or do you think Georgia's got too much?
Well, 12.5 points is a lot of points for a championship game. It's pretty much it is a lack of respect for TCU and for the Big 12, I think. But TCU just beat maybe the best team in the country. So before that game, everybody would have figured it's going to be Michigan or Georgia, that Michigan was playing at the highest level. Well, guess what? TCU played at a higher level than that. Georgia didn't. So, is Georgia going to come out and play like they did last week, or are they going to come out and play like they have most of the year? Well, if TCU plays like they have most of the year, they're going to win the game because that's who they are. So, I don't know. I would take the points and watch the game and see what happens. But I think you never know. You hope these are great games for the sake of the sport. But sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. And it comes down to injuries, Ohio State, that game came down to Harrison getting hurt.
Yeah.
If he doesn't get hurt, Ohio State probably wins that game, but he got hurt. And those things there's no way you can plan around those.
Did Michigan try and get too cute on offense?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. You do things for a reason, and the reasons are good, solid, and if you decide to go that way with a little more razzle dazzle than you normally have, then you either live with it or die with it. But you make it. You don't sit there and go, let's make some really stupid decisions in this game.
That's not
what do you
intentional.
think? Who gets to do the first one? Well, I will, Coach. Yeah. So, no, it's I don't know if they got too cute, but, they were playing a good football team. I think they were surprised to see TCU as good as they were.
That's where I want to go. TCU, are they just built a little different than a lot of the Big 12? They seem really blue collar, but I think they're super physical. I mean, they tackle well, and then they've got explosiveness as well.
Well, you got to understand that team is built by Gary Patterson, and Gary Patterson is one tough-minded, hard-nosed dude. And Sonny just brought an offense to him and a couple of players through the portal to fill in the holes that TCU had before, when they let Gary Patterson go. So this is a combination of Sonny's organization and Sonny's offense and the TCU tough-mindedness that Gary Patterson created.
Coach, let's talk Jim Harbaugh. And do you think he's fishing, or do you think he really wants to head off to the NFL?
I think he wants to head off to the NFL. I was good friends with Rich Rodriguez back when he was at West Virginia, and he went and almost took the job at Alabama, and then came back. They built him a new weight room, and then he almost took the job somewhere else and came back because they built him a new academic center. And then he was toying with Michigan, and he came back, and they said, nah, go to Michigan. We've had enough of this. Mm-hmm. And so you got to be careful what you wish for. But I think any college coach in his right mind is going to look at the NFL right now, because it's so hard to do what they have to do in college right now. Roster manage, you have to have such a staff. The NIL out of control. It's crazy, and you can't just be a ball coach. And Jim's a ball coach. He doesn't like all this other stuff, and most of us don't. And he's that age group that he's closer to my age than yours probably, and so he needs to. And I don't blame him at all for going and looking. And if Michigan gets mad, so be it. But Jim Harbaugh's got his life to live, and it looks more fun to me right now in the NFL than it does in college.
Gary Barnett, couple minutes with us, Hail Varsity Radio. Coach, Nebraska able to go to the portal and get Sims from Georgia Tech. Casey Thompson going to be back. What does that do for the quarterback room, having both of those options, in your opinion, for a year one with Coach Rhule?
Well, you saw this year how important it was to have two quarterbacks. And so you have to, in this day and age, you have to have two quarterbacks. And it just gives them needed depth, and you just hope Sims is good enough to push Thompson a little bit, but at least come in and perform at a high level if injuries occur again. So you've got to have depth at the quarterback spot. There's just a couple places where you absolutely have to have depth, and that is place number one, I'd say.
What do you think Coach Rhule's walking into? And we spent some time on it this week, where your starting point of a program, year one for you, and Nebraska's been like some other programs that has just had way too much turnover, but there's been some talent in the cupboard, so to speak, and your job's to maximize that talent, recruit it. I mean, so far so good with what he did in the recruiting world. Now you get here, but I guess the question is how far down or how far to go to stabilize Nebraska with Rhule's history and also what he's coming into?
Well, I think, first of all, you need to just turn your resources back on, turn them up a little bit higher, because you've got resources at Nebraska. And then, do what you do. I mean, Matt got there by building 2 programs up, taking one over at Baylor that was in shambles, and then turning Temple around. He came in after Al Golden, and Al did a good job because that was a total rebuild. And between the two of them, they created, something that hadn't been done. And so I think Matt just needs to do what he does, and I think that he needs to turn the burners on and the resources that Nebraska has. Nebraska wasn't that far away. When you look at the number of games, especially over the last 2 years that they've lost, they're not that far away. They just haven't been able to get over the hump, and now that's Matt's job, is to get them over that hump. But he's got resources, he's got tradition, he's got all that on the side, he's got fan base, and so you just go. This isn't a rebuild, at all, and I think he knows that when he went there, or he knew that. So I think he does what he does, and he lets the Nebraska resources get turned up a little bit, and he'll be just fine.
Coach, want to end it with Hamlin and Buffalo, and just tap into you with just a difficult situation and how you were able to lead during it. And I look at Coach McDermott and Coach Zach Taylor. Obviously, the first responders, phenomenal, and just the outpouring, incredible. But coaches had to be leaders in that moment, and they were. And how do you, or can you, prepare yourself for something that is emotionally and draining and very scary?
Well, you can't prepare yourself for it, but what you can do is seize the moment and realize that you are, you lead day in and day out in various other areas, and you're an example. But this particular situation, it's so high profile, and so many people are watching. This is your greatest chance to lead. And I think if you seize that moment, you realize that, and you take controls and you do what needs to be done. And whatever that is you feel it needs to be, you do it. And, it is hard. I've had 3 of those, and it's one survived, 2 didn't. And it's just overwhelming, but you gather yourself, you make yourself the best you've ever been, and then do what you can and do what instinctually you should do, and that's all you can do.
Coach, you said you've had instances, you've lost a couple players, correct? Was it due to injury,
yes.
or was it injury related, or was it off field?
It was all 3 of them. 2 of them were off the field. One was on the field.
So you did lose a player on the field.
Well, he's the one that survived. Eddie Reinhardt at Oregon survived in 1984, and our team did not want to play they didn't want to practice for 3 weeks. We were a mess. But, guys didn't want to play anymore. And so you have to, you're the guy in charge. You're the guy you're their father at that point in time. And you've got to do what you need to do. The other 2 was Sal Inessi, of course, died of stomach cancer. And then my first week of college coaching, I had a player at Fort Lewis fall off a cliff on a Sunday. They had the day off, fall off a cliff diving into the pools up in Durango. And he didn't make it. And that was, we couldn't even find him for a while. So yeah, that's tough stuff. And you can't say, well, I've done this once, I can do it again. It's a different situation every time.
Coach, thanks for your perspective with this situation, and we'll catch up again soon and be a little more cheery. But thank you so much, Coach. Good to spend time
Chris.
with you.
Yeah, good to be with you, man.
And now, back to Hail Varsity Radio.
Back with you at Hail Varsity, presented by Currency. We say hi to Mitch Sherman from The Athletic. Can find Mitch on Twitter at Mitch Sherman. Mitch, you got your sleeves rolled up for tomorrow, Satterfield and White at the podium. Good to spend time with you. Thanks for joining us today.
Yep, good to be with you on the other side of the holiday season. Hope it all went well for you, and back to football we get on a Friday at Memorial Stadium with the new coordinators. Looking forward to it.
what has this bowl season shown you? And we hit on it a little bit yesterday, but the reaction initially to the 3-3-5 defense, and honestly, a lot of squads run that, some variation of it, and didn't have horrible results. And of course, TCU will be front and center with their defense, and I know they're all a little bit different, but pretty good showcase with athleticism and pressure with these different 3-3-5 defenses.
Right, you saw it at Mississippi State and Syracuse, a couple of schools that run variations of the 3-3-5 that are directly linked to what Tony White does. You know, Mississippi State, of course, it comes straight from the Rocky Long school of defense there, and Rocky Long was the mentor for Tony White and has taken over at Syracuse now for Tony. So there's a lot of connections when it comes to teams that run that defense. TCU has their own version that didn't come out of the same coaching tree that produced Tony White here in Lincoln. And it was interesting to watch the way that game unfolded, in part because it was against a big, physical Big Ten team in Michigan. I think there was some comments made, a little snickering before the game about how that defensive front might stack up against Michigan's physical play. And you looked at it at halftime, and Michigan had squandered some opportunities inside the 5-yard line, but 6 points on the board at halftime was not in any way what they were anticipating against that defense or any defense. And, I think some people made some comments, including myself, about how the 3-3-5 was stacking up against Michigan, and they go out and score 39 points in the second half. So, there was some good and some bad. I will say this in my observation at the end of the day when in the Fiesta Bowl, and how the 3-3-5 worked against a strong Big Ten opponent. I think Michigan against TCU, no matter the scheme, no matter the defensive scheme that the Horned Frogs played that day on New Year's Eve, Michigan was going to score some points and put up some yards eventually in that game. Against personnel, Michigan had some advantages. The reason that TCU won, other than outscoring Michigan and having Max Duggan and getting, 51 points, is that the defense made plays that kept TCU in the game. I don't know that another defensive scheme that isn't quite as disruptive turns in 11 TFLs. And certainly the 2 pick sixes were against J.J. McCarthy, and that was not a staple of his play during the season. He was very efficient with the football. But to throw 2 pick sixes, it's tough to win any game. And I think you can look to the defensive scheme that TCU threw out there as perhaps confusing Michigan in some ways. So it'll be interesting to see how Nebraska moving forward is able to utilize that defensive look, if in fact it's similar to what TCU did, to create the kind of confusion that we saw on New Year's Eve in Phoenix.
Mitch, on the flip side of things, the offensive side, it was Coach Satterfield's offense with South Carolina. I know he wasn't coaching in the bowl game, but they were able to put up 38 points against Notre Dame. And if you go look back at Notre Dame's season, the only other team to do that was USC. And it should be noted, a couple teams got into the 30-point range with that Notre Dame defense. But South Carolina able to put up 38 points in the bowl game. What did you take away from that offensive showing, and what do you think it means for Nebraska's offense moving forward?
Sure. I mean, South Carolina with Spencer Rattler had an explosive offense, and I don't believe all of those 38 points were put up on the offensive side by South Carolina. There was there a long pick six?
Almost 100 yard.
Yeah, almost 100 yard. Yeah.
Yeah, that's long. That qualifies as long. But yeah, I mean, Elijah, the South Carolina offense, it's not just against Notre Dame and a good defense there, but look at what South Carolina did with Satterfield coaching that group to end the season against Tennessee and Clemson. And you saw a team that was as hot offensively as any group in the country. And, I haven't sat down to dissect it enough, and I can't say that I've watched film of what South Carolina did offensively against Clemson and Tennessee that allowed them to break out the way that they did. But I do know that offense that he designed was as hot as any offense in the country in the last 2 to 3 games of the year.
Well, I think the credit you give to Satterfield from my eyes watching it was that he did design an offense that fit his players, and whether or not that can be the same at Nebraska, I guess, remains to be seen. But I think that's the credit to him with what he had at South Carolina. There were some sputters early with that offense, but eventually the offense found their footing, and it was an offense that fit the strengths of his players. And I guess my question to you is, when you look at this offense next season, what do you think is going to be a strength? Do you believe what Matt Rhule says, that, we believe the offensive line and the rushing attack can be a strength?
It's going to have to be for Nebraska to put out an effective offense. And we don't know the entire personnel lineup at this point. There's more work to be done in the transfer portal between now and the summer. So I think you could see Nebraska add another tight end. I think you could see Nebraska add another receiver or two. Perhaps they're done at running back with A.J. Allen and Anthony Grant, or, switch that order in line to return, along with some others. Gabe Irvin, Ramir Johnson is still around. It would look like the Huskers are in pretty good shape at running back, but so much about what Nebraska's offense is going to look like, of course, comes down to the quarterback, and there's uncertainty at that spot right now as Jeff Sims comes in this month as a transfer from Georgia Tech, and Casey Thompson works to get himself healthy. I don't know that we'll have answers to that question after the spring, because it's unlikely that Casey Thompson is going to be 100% or anywhere near 100%. I don't think he's going to take hits in the spring. And why would you? If you have a sixth-year guy who is as old and experienced as Casey Thompson, and he's somebody who's in the running to be your starting quarterback, there's just not a lot of sense, if he's coming off of an injury, to send him out there and have him take any kind of contact, or in his case with shoulder surgery, really put that shoulder under duress with a lot of throws until you absolutely need him to in August.
Mitch Sherman's with us here, Hail Varsity Radio. Mitch, you got busy right before the new year with a story, and got your crystal ball out here with the Rhule era and some predictions and thoughts for the new year in 2023. Focus on a couple of names in your story, Thomas Fidone and Teddy Prohaska, both guys that have a tremendous upside, both guys that have battled injuries. And do you think moving forward, those are two guys that can make, and do they have to make an impact with Nebraska moving forward? No fault of their own. They've done a great job of rehabbing. I really haven't had much of a glimpse of Fidone and a small snippet of Teddy.
Yeah, you remember these guys were cornerstones. They were arguably the two premier signees in Nebraska's 2021 class. And then with Thomas, it's been one spring with a knee injury, and then the next spring with another knee injury. And I think the big focus for him is building strength and building muscle and working on his flexibility. From the time that he signed with Nebraska and came on our radar, actually even before he signed with Nebraska, when he was a big-time recruit out of Council Bluffs. You looked at his body and you looked at the way that he played the game, and there was always kind of a concern about injury prevention, because he's so angular and so long, and he's a big target coming across the middle, that he was opening himself. He was going to be opened up to taking lots of hits, and he was going to need to do things to prevent injuries that unfortunately have plagued his career through 2 years at Nebraska. So the hope is that he can avoid anything like that. And I think it starts in off the field stuff. It starts in the way that he trains and the way that he gets his body ready to go. I mean, he's in shape and always has been in shape, but there are certainly other things that he needs to do to build strength and flexibility that can help him be less likely to have another one of those problems. It's the same knee that he's messed up both times. So, I think he's kind of at the end of the line there. You can't have that happen to the same knee a third time, or I just don't really see how you can go forward. There's probably not much that doctors can do if they have to go in there a third time. So it's now or never to some degree. I mean, certainly he could have another kind of injury and come back from it, but that knee is, it needs to stay healthy for Fidone. And if it does, then his ceiling as a tight end in this offense is higher than any other player on the roster at that position. And for Teddy, different injuries in the 2 years that he's been here, so he's not in the same situation necessarily as Thomas, where it's now or never. But you want to see him have success and stay on the field in this third year in the program. He's so big at his size as an offensive tackle that, I think there's always going to be a little bit of concern about lower body stuff. And I think there were some upper body injuries that happened to him in this 2022 season. But for both of those guys, the focus has got to be staying healthy, staying on the field. And if they're in that condition, then they're both going to be in position to really help this team next year.
Mitch Sherman with us from The Athletic, and Max Duggan, a player you know and have covered, and his story at TCU well documented. What would it mean and say for TCU to be able to come out on top of Georgia? I know that line's pretty steep, but overall with Duggan, what's he have to do Monday night?
He's kind of got to be Superman against that Georgia defense, don't you think?
I think so.
Yeah, and he's been that often this season for TCU. They're a running threat, a passing threat. And I watched closely TCU's last two games, both the Big 12 championship and then, of course, the game against Michigan on New Year's Eve, and he seems to be able to do it all. And that's going to have to be the case again. And I think this task that he's got in front of him on Monday night against Georgia is clearly the steepest of those three because of the athletes that Georgia has on the defensive side of the ball. But, Ohio State, I think, put out a blueprint. Incredible athletes. And if there's any team in the country that has more athletes than Georgia, it's Alabama or it's Ohio State. And Ohio State showed that in the other semifinal and nearly walked away with a win against Georgia. But Georgia survives, and I think Georgia's got the strongest defense of any of the teams in the CFP field. So the challenge is steep for Max, but he's really overcome all of them that have been placed in front of him, not just this year, but in his career. To have started as a true freshman and to have overcome a health scare after the pandemic and to have battled back from being benched at the start of this season to finish second in the Heisman. It's a great story for a guy from Council Bluffs, Iowa, to be doing what he's doing and play on the stage. So looking forward to watching him and the Frogs on Monday night.
Mitch, we'll check in next week. Thanks for your time at Inside as always.
All right. Thanks, Chris.
He's in his 30s, but sounds like he was born with a stogie in one hand and a brew in the other.
Now, say my name.
It's Schmitty on Hail Varsity Radio.
I got the body of a taut, preteen Swedish boy.
Back into it, it's Hail Varsity Radio. Burke's Best Bets, Danny Burke with us. VSiN Sports Network. Find him on Twitter at Danny Burke 5, the Danny Burke Podcast, and weekend coverage, of course, with VSiN. Danny, a lot of NFL going on and playoff football next weekend, play-in football this weekend. How you doing?
I'm doing good, gentlemen. Yeah, it's that bittersweet time of the year. You're excited for the postseason, but you're a little sad because full slate of NFL games coming down to an end, which for some people might be good in terms of how much you're betting and just needing a break. But no, man, it's a unique week. It's one that you really got to do your due diligence on for research and almost got to play the part of a psychiatrist sometimes trying to get to the mind of these teams, coaches, players, and what the incentive is for a lot of them.
Well, Jacksonville's stormed out of nowhere. They've been consistent. Trevor Lawrence really coming into his own, and a chance for Jayville to keep on playing. They are minus 6.5 right now. Tennessee's a bit of a shell of themselves.
Yeah, look, I get that Vrabel arguably, and again, I'm not saying I necessarily am on this side, but he's arguably the better coach in this situation against Doug Peterson. What's it come down to, though? I'd say it comes down to momentum and quarterback play, and obviously Joshua Dobbs versus Trevor Lawrence. I think we all know who gets to not. And, yeah, Vrabel could put together a good game plan against a familiar team, but at the end of the day, Jacksonville against the run has been a strong unit. They're allowing, I think, top 5 in terms of fewest yards per carry in terms of the entire season. And the last 3 games, that number has shrunk to under 4 yards per carry. So cool, you have one main focus offensively. You can contain that and limit it as much as possible if you're Jacksonville. Force Joshua Dobbs in the biggest game of his life to make the big plays in a do-or-die game. I'm going to take my chances with the Jaguars. However, considering it is a division game and, Vrabel still can't coach a hell of a team when there's not that much to work with, I just teased down Jacksonville to a pick 'em. So I took them from 6 to a pick. Obviously, at 6 in the hook, I'd still take them down because it's them winning the game just minus the half. So I think that personally, from my standpoint, is the best route to take instead of sweating out Jacksonville to win by a touchdown against a familiar division opponent.
Danny Burke is with us here. It's Burke's Best Bets on Hail Varsity Radio. And Danny, a quick one to follow up on that game is Christian Kirk. Player incentive on the line. He's got two of them, actually. He needs 2 catches for a $500,000 bonus, and he needs 91 yards for a $500,000 bonus. His over is set, I believe, at somewhere around 50-something yards. Is that something you look the over on, or considering there's a lot on the line in this game, do you say, you know what, I'm going to stay away from that because the Jaguars aren't going to be trying to feed him?
Yeah, you're just kind of looking at these incentives, and obviously this is something that's baked into the number a lot of times by these sports books. If you know it, they know it too. And a lot of people are just going to quickly jump to automatically play the over. And look, while he may be getting targeted more because of that, like you said, Elijah, I mean, this game is different. This is virtually a playoff game for these teams. So the game plan isn't going to circle around getting some guys or extra catches. I know Zay Jones has some incentives as well as Christian Kirk. So, yeah, while you maybe want to think that they'd be targeted more because of that, realistically, their goal here is to win the game and advance into the postseason. So those guys in particular, and in other games where they're still on the line for seeding for playoffs, I'm not too enticed to look at their player props for their incentives because, again, the biggest incentive is winning the game and doing it at whatever cost, even if it's not getting that person the ball. So it's a good angle to look at for certain spots, just not in this particular one.
Danny, let's go to the Sunday night matchup, Lions at Green Bay. Packers minus 4.5 at home. Detroit has been fascinating with just what they've done offensively. They've put up a lot of points so many weeks. Green Bay, though, feeling all right. They're still alive. I know this hinges on Seattle, but do you have a thought with this Green Bay Lions showdown?
Yeah, so this one comes down to what happens with Seattle and the Rams, because if the Seahawks win, then the Lions are eliminated from postseason contention. And with the assumption that they do win, well, where's this line going to move knowing that the Lions can't make the postseason? So it's at about 4 in the hook right now. I was talking to some guys out in Vegas, and they would say maybe at the most it would reach 6 in the hook. I think that's probably where it will go. But again, they may know a little bit more than I do. And you may think to steer away from the Lions at that point, but let's be honest, Dan Campbell is a very passionate guy, a dude that's going to have his players motivated regardless, because if that comes to fruition, no, the Lions don't have a chance to make the postseason, but they have a chance to be spoilers and cap their heroic comeback season off in a great way and keep that momentum going into next year. So I would be tempted to actually take the points with Detroit at that point if it reaches it. But right now, there's nothing worth playing. Now, the other side to the coin is, well, you could tease down Green Bay because it's a must-win, and it's an indoor team, Jared Goff, in a cold weather situation at night on primetime. I get all that. I think that's a viable play, too. We just won't know until we see the outcome of Seattle. So that's going to be a wait-and-see approach in that game. But, yeah, Green Bay probably gets the job done. And then comes the narrative of, oh, Aaron Rodgers in the playoffs, here they are sneaking in. Maybe it's better for them that they didn't have that great of a season, not as much pressure on their shoulders, but there's still a lot of flaws with this team, even though they are looking a lot better these last few weeks. So I wouldn't go too crazy, but, hey, at the same time, the benefit from them is you get an open NFC. So who knows? Anything truly can happen throughout that conference.
It's Burke's Best Bets here on Hail Varsity Radio. And, Danny, going to a game that's earlier in the day, the Giants and the Eagles. This is a line that surprised me. The Eagles are favored by 14 points. Can you tell me what's going on there with that line?
Well, so the Giants have nothing to play for here. I mean, they're already locked up into the 6th seed, I believe, so there's no incentive for any of their starters to play in this game. They just want to stay healthy, and they just want to get into the postseason and be prepared for that. As for the Eagles, they need to win this game to still wrap up the division against the Cowboys, to still wrap up the number 1 seed. Not sure who's going to be starting between Hurts and Minshew, but again, it's not going to matter against this Giants team that doesn't give a crap at this spot. But in terms of the spread, that doesn't mean that you automatically lay it with the Eagles because, look, I mean, some of these guys are still vying for playing opportunities, for contracts, for pride, whatever you want to call it. And 14's a lot, especially if it's not Hurts in the mix. And once they realize they have a comfortable lead, maybe they take some of their guys out. The backdoor cover at such an enormous spread is out there for the taking. So I wouldn't touch anything in this game. If you want to look at a spot like, say, this game, like, say, the Bucs who are playing their starters, say the San Francisco 49ers, where there are bigger spreads. I know the Bucs don't qualify, but in the situation of these guys playing their starters and then wanting to rest them, look at some first-half angles. That may be your approach to take with the Eagles if you want to do that instead of laying the full game at 14. Look at something in the first half where they definitely want to play hard and establish a big lead, and then in the second half they may take their foot off the pedal.
Danny, last thought here, about 30 seconds. Let's go to a noon game on Sunday, the Jets and the Dolphins, where the Dolphins are a 2-point favorite. What do you like here?
I like absolutely nothing here, Elijah. I don't know what to make of the quarterback situation, the total. I mean, the Dolphins need to win to get in, but the Dolphins are in a nightmare scenario with their quarterback. So I'll tell you another thing there, because I don't want to end on that necessarily. I told you about the teaser with Jacksonville. I did tease down the Vikings, too. The Bears are giving up. They need to try to get a top draft pick. Peterson's in the mix. The Vikings needed to get a better seed than the 49ers potentially, and they got to get that stink off of that embarrassing loss against the Packers last week. So look to tease down the Vikings. If you don't like the Jacksonville tease, seriously consider Minnesota, because it would be ridiculous for them not to be able to win that game against the Bears by 3 or more.
Danny Burke with VSiN Sports Network at Danny Burke5 on Twitter. Danny, we'll talk next week. Thanks for the time.
Absolutely, fellas. Always appreciate it.
Miss us?
Come here, brother. Give me a hug. Bring it in for the real thing.
We're on call for you. Catch the podcast at HailVarsity.com, the ESPN Lincoln app, or download them on iTunes.
Saddle up, partner.
Back to Hail Varsity Radio.
One final time, good stuff today on a Thursday. Big thanks to Brandon Vogel and Mitch Sherman, Coach Gary Barnett. You just heard Danny Burke with VSiN Sports Network. Get the podcast, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. Full show available for you. Also, individualized segments when you go to Spotify, iTunes, Google Play with Hail Varsity. Give us some feedback, good, bad, or ugly. Love the reaction from you. What you think of the show and the podcast. You can always find it also on the Hail Varsity YouTube channel. And we love streaming the show live with StreamYard 2 on Hail Varsity Radio's Twitter handle at HVarsity Radio. Be sure to check Coffee and Cream out tomorrow morning. We got the breakfast thing rocking up at the Hail Varsity Club a couple of times a month on Fridays, which is awesome, which is outstanding.
Go get yourself a ticket.
Yeah.
Hill Varsity Club and go watch Coffee and Cream. And I like their little advertisement they had a little earlier in the show. We'll see how the sausage is made.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
It's very real because, for me getting into radio, being somebody who grew up listening to not only you, but used to love Mike and Mike in the morning back in the day.
That is so nice of Elijah saying, Schmidt, you are an old bastard.
Well, no, every single day. On my ride home from elementary school, there's Chris Schmidt on the radio.
Between you going to elementary school and me student teaching Will Wilson with Morning Hookup,
you just feel older and older every single year doing radio.
I feel more distinguished.
It's fair. It's fair. You've been around for forever, as long as I can remember, essentially.
I don't care with the age part of it, but yeah, it's fun.
It's like getting into it. It's very much like, this is radio. It's very different seeing how it's actually done as opposed to what you hear on the radio.
This big dumb animal can do it. Maybe I can get into it.
No comment on that. No comment on that. But go check it out at the Hail Varsity Club. Get yourself some awesome breakfast while you're at it. Maybe some coffee with some cream. I'm more of a black coffee guy myself, but coffee and cream is the name of the game tomorrow morning. So go check them out.
Yeah, HailVarsity.com/offer. Check that out as well to subscribe to Hail Varsity Magazine. And, of course, the digital content that's great. Tomorrow, Jacob Padilla get us set for Nebraska basketball and the weekend of prep action. Brady Holtman's from Hail Varsity. Also, the recruiting weekend. We laid out a number of the portal visitors and a chance at a Baylor and Stanford get. I think... I'm fairly certain here that Rouse, the left tackle for Stanford, Nebraska is his last rodeo, as in this is the last visit for him before he decides. That is potentially big. So Nebraska could use a guy that's played 4 years at Stanford.
And I saw a thing on Twitter that was power ranking visits, and it was number 1, last visit, number 2, first visit, number 3, visit with family. The number 4 was any other visit.
Yeah.
So last visit, big deal.
I think warm weather visit in cold in winter months also rates very high.
That's how old Kiffin down at Ole Miss does it.
Oh, sure. Old Lane Train does a wonderful job of being Lane.
Well, it's funny because the kids down there are wearing winter coats and whatnot, but you walk like as me as a Nebraskan go down there in February, and I'm like, oh, it's mid-50s. This is beautiful.
It's outstanding.
All the other kids down there are freezing.
We have an APB out for Bill Dolman. Pride of Fairbury is supposed to be with us tomorrow. So that is on the schedule. Enjoy your Thursday. Thanks for tuning in with Hail Varsity, presented by Currency. Have a great night.